All right, guys. Welcome. This is the very last lesson in chapter 5, so you're almost there if you're watching this and you've got a good grasp on factoring. And this is just, it's going to give you some more factoring practice, and then we're just going to add a single step to our process. So let's take a look at the title. Today's title is Solving by Factoring. So when we solve, suddenly we go from an expression to an equation. And how you can tell the difference, a really sure way, is number one, the instructions will say solve rather than factor. And number two, you'll see an equal sign. And so whenever you see an equal sign, you know the instructions are going to be solve. And now that I look at my examples, if we were in person and I was teaching in my normal capacity, I usually remember to write this. So up until this point, our goal has been simply to factor, but now we're going to add a step. So my instructions say solve, and all of my problems have an equal sign. All right, so what are the steps? Well, the first step is we need to make sure that my polynomial has equal to 0. So equals 0, equals 0. This one doesn't, so when we get to this problem, we're going to have to do an extra step. Once we know that it's equal to 0, this is going to reinforce our factoring skills because our step 2 in the process will be to factor. Step 3 is once we have that factor down, we're simply going to take each one of our factors and set it equal to 0, and then we're going to come up with 2 answers, and we'll go through what those look like through our examples. All right, a few little hints that I found are helpful for students is that if your problem is a second degree equation, you'll see x squared will be the highest exponent, and you should anticipate 2 answers in your answer. If it's to the 3rd degree or x to the 3rd, you should expect 3 answers. So if you kind of plant that somewhere as you're going through the problems, that hopefully will prove helpful. All right. X squared minus 7x, we see that it's an x squared, so that's how we know we're only anticipating 2 answers. There's not a whole lot I can do with this. Remember, our first rule of factoring is GCF. So if I pull an x out of both, which is that greatest common factor, I am left with x out front and then x minus 7 in my parentheses. This is the first factor, this is the second factor. So it says for my next step, this one's done, then it says go ahead and set each factor equal to 0 and solve. Because what this problem is saying is what value of x will make this completely go away. Excuse me, let me clear my throat real quick. And the only time you're ever going to end up multiplying 2 numbers and coming up with 0 is if one of the factors is 0. So if I set this, if that doesn't make sense to you initially, by the time we're done with all of these, hopefully that will make a little bit more sense. So if I set this factor equal to 0, there's nothing to solve. But if I set this factor equal to 0, in order to solve for x, I would need to add 7 to both sides. And so you can plug it in and you can see what I'm saying is true about the whole multiply by 0 thing. All right, if x was 0, if I plug in x is 0, I would have 0. See what I'm saying? So 0 times negative 7 is 0. If x was negative 7 and I plugged negative 7 in, one of the whole factors has to be 0. So if I plugged in negative 7 for x here, and then I plugged in, oh, not negative 7, my bad, positive 7. And then if I plugged in positive 7 for x there, this one would now turn into 0, which is the only way 2 numbers multiply to 0. So you have two different answers because there's two ways that your product could be 0. Either by the first factor or by the second. Let's go through this process again. Yes, it's set equal to 0, so our first step is done. We're now going to factor this polynomial. So two numbers that multiply to 5 and add up to -6, or if both of these are negative. So x minus 5 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. Don't know why I put parentheses around that. Oh, because I was factoring, sorry. I could redo my whole video. I think I'll just rewrite it. So x minus 5, I'm just doing the next step in my head here already. And so now that we have it factored, I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. And then I'm going to add 5 to both sides to solve this side for x. And I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And so my two answers here are 5 and 1. So if you plug a 5 in for your original x, you'll end up with a 0. If you plug a 1 in for x, whether it be this step, or this step, you would end up with 0. So we have two answers, and it's x squared. All right, our next one, you see that it's not equal to 0 here. So we need to do something prior to even factoring. We need to move this guy to the other side. So we're going to subtract 18, just jump it over. If you're able to do that in your head, you know it's positive on the right, so it's negative on the left. That's great. Check for a GCF. There isn't one, because I kind of noticed at first that that's 2 and that's 18, but 9 is not an even number. So we're going to have to slip and slide. So multiply that to the back. Look for some factors that make 9. There's two factors that make 9, so if it's a positive 12 and a negative 3, since I multiplied by that 2 at the beginning, I now need to go back and divide by that 2 at the end. This can't be reduced, so that 2 slides back in front. This can be reduced, so it simply becomes x plus 6. So that gets us to right here. All of that work gets us to, we factored it correctly, stage. And now we're going to implement how to solve it, which is just set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So now we're just going to split it. I'm going to take this factor, and I'm going to solve for x. So x is 3/2, and I have this factor. And again, you don't need to show all these steps if you're comfortable with solving. If you know it's positive on the left, it's going to be negative on the right. So those are my two answers there. X equals 3/2 and x equals -6. All right. I might stop there. So if you need to catch up, pause, because I'm about ready to erase so that all of this just doesn't get in the way of this one. And I have a few more. This section does have some more complicated ones that in order to even get to this point, you're going to have to do some additional algebra and simplification. All right, so let's do this last one here, and then I'll put up a few more. All right, number 1, it's not equal to 0. So let's jump this to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 35x, subtract 35x. So x to the third minus 2x squared minus 35x equals 0. Notice that it's x to the third. So that tells me that I'm going to have 3 answers, because for each degree, that's going to give me an answer. All right, I do have a GCF, so I'm going to pull that x out. That's going to give me one of my answers right there. And now I'm going to factor, so 2 factors of 35 that add up to -2. And then each factor is going to give me an answer. So hopefully you've kind of started seeing the pattern that if it's a negative inside the factor, the answer is going to be positive. So for instance, if it's x minus 7 equals 0, my answer is going to be a positive 7. If there's an x straight out here, my answer is going to be a 0. And here, I get an answer of -5. If you're able to look and just see that pattern, that's fabulous. And you should start looking for those patterns where if it's an x out front, that automatically gives you a 0. If this is a negative, you get a positive. If this is a positive, you get a negative. And as long as there's not coefficients here, that's a nice little shortcut to use. All right. Let's do a few more, make it just slightly more complicated so you have a lot of different examples to look at for your homework. What happens if it looks something like this? I think we're on E. I have this one. And at any time you want to pause and try, I would encourage you to do that. And I apologize if you can hear the phone in the background. It is not my phone, so I apologize if you can hear that. Hopefully it's not too distracting. And then let's try this one. And these are all solved. Sometimes, as you have already seen, I forget to write solve, 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 solve. So these are all solving questions. And so just want to throw one of them out there that is the difference of 2 perfect squares. It is already set equal to 0. So 2x plus 7 and 2x minus 7. And then we can set each factor equal to 0. Hopefully you can see the pattern that the numbers are the same and you're just going to have one positive answer, one negative answer. So we have that. And we have that. Now, take a quick second and look and see if you can like kind of compare between the answer and the factor. Notice how it's the opposite of this over this. The opposite of that number over this number. So I'm just trying to point out, you certainly don't have to use any shortcuts, but I'm trying to point out some shortcuts that might help you in your work. So total side comment, if this was your factor, what would your answer be? Just see if you can do it in your head. All right? you're going to do the opposite of that divided by that. The opposite over that, because prove that what you're saying is true. Because you're going to end up dividing by the number that's in front of the x. So hopefully you're seeing that pattern develop, and then you can utilize that to save yourself some work. All right. F. F can be confusing because there is a GCF. However, this is only x squared, so don't anticipate 3 answers. There's still just going to be 2 answers if it's x squared. So we're going to pull that 2 out, but that is not a variable. So that is not going to give us an answer, which is why I wanted to make sure I showed you one like this. We're going to slip and slide it. So x squared minus 5x minus 36. I'm gonna run out of space here. X minus 9 and x plus 4 will give us that negative 5. Since I multiplied by the 6 here, I need to divide by the 6 here. I haven't forgotten about the 0 or the 2. All right, and in fact, the 2 does not give us any answers, so at any point along, you can also use your textbook to look at examples there. At any point, you can just divide that out, and it literally just divides out. 0 divided by 2 is 0, and it just divides away. It does not give us an answer because it's not a variable. And I know that can be confusing. All right, so 9 over 6, we're going to take out a 3. 4 over 6, we're going to take out a 2. This 3 slides in front, so I have 2x minus 3. And this 3 slides in front, so I have 3x plus 2. Let me double check that you're still on screen. Oh, perfect. Okay. And so try to use that little shortcut that I was showing you over here. It's the opposite of this number, and then we always have to undo that multiply, so whatever number's right there is going to end up in the denominator. So my 2 answers for x, you're welcome to do it the long way if you'd like. I have students that definitely have done that every time in the past, but my 2 answers are positive 3/2 and negative 2/3. All right, let's look at G. Gosh, it looks like G is really easy because it's already factored for us. However, this is not an equals 0. So here's what we have to do. We're going to have to FOIL. Then we're going to move the 9 and set our equation equal to 0. And then we're going to factor it again because we're going to have to include that 9. And then we're going to set our factors equal to 0 and solve. So whenever you have a situation, there's going to be a variety of types of problems like this that you might encounter. If it doesn't equal 0, you've got to incorporate that number back into your equation. So here we go. We're going to have 2x squared minus 1x plus 6x minus 3. So we're going to have 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. I am going to cheat in the interest of space. So I'm going to subtract that 9, subtract that 9. A negative 3 and a negative 9 is going to make negative 12. And that's going to go to 0. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to cheat right there just to save myself space. I'm not really cheating. I'm just not rewriting the whole thing. All right, and now I just need to slip and slide that. So I'm going to multiply through by that 2. I'm going to factor. I'm going to divide by that 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And this cannot be reduced, so this is going to be 2x minus 3. And so this right here will give me an answer of negative 4. And this factor right there will give me an answer of 3/2. So a little bit more complicated, a little bit more work. All right, last problem, and then we're done with the chapter. So that's fabulous. I hope that you're finding success. I want to show you this last one because something interesting happens. It's not difficult to factor, so I just didn't want to not show you one like this. Two numbers that multiply to 4 that add up to 4 are 2 and 2. When we solve each problem, we're going to get x equals -2 and x equals -2. And you can just write that. I am unsure at this point. I'm learning with you. I'm not familiar with MyMathLab enough to know if you're going to put it in twice, or it is considered to be called a double root. When we get to the chapter on quadratics, if you remember quadratic formula and parabolas, all that's coming towards the end of our class, and it is considered to be a double root or a double solution, and so it's possible that you're just going to enter it once because it just repeats itself. So I wanted to make sure that I showed you one like that as well. So, okay, you have done, let's see, you are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2/5 through the course. So that is fabulous, and as always, take care and enjoy the rest of your day.